Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here to talk about a movie that proves once and for all that dogs are better than cats. Paws of Fury, The Legend of Hank, is dropping in theaters this Friday. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So right off the top, let's sort of let the cat out of the bag. Probably the question that people have been wondering about. And here's the answer. Paws of Fury is not just Kung Fu Panda with a dog. There are definitely some differences. I know a lot of people, when they saw the trailer for that, first trailer for this movie, they said, hey, this is just Kung Fu Panda, but with a dog instead of a panda. There are differences. The film is obviously trying to capture some of that same magic and probably box office money that the Kung Fu Panda movies have. And there are definitely similarities. The story, in a lot of ways, follows the same kind of narrative structure, kind of telling the story of some outsider that dreams of being a warrior and doesn't quite fit the expectations for the warrior and has to be trained by a reluctant older mentor, and kind of how to become the best version of himself and not just conform to expectations. Sounds familiar because that's essentially the plot of Kung Fu Panda. But to be fair, Kung Fu Panda didn't necessarily invent the hero's journey either, but there are definitely some similarities. But where I think that the similarities in like the narrative are unmistakable, it is quite similar. Kind of what separates Hank's kind of martial arts adventure from Paws is really in the tone and the presentation. So whereas Kung Fu Panda is really a loving homage to the classic tropes of martial arts films, Paws of Fury is far more irreverent, kind of almost to a fault. And maybe the best way to the comparison is that it sort of is to like samurai martial arts films what like Shrek was to fairy tales. It kind of fuses like the kind of the classical world with like the modern world, and kind of blends things together. Like it's sort of set in like this old kind of martial arts community and stuff and culture, but they talk about like cars, or they send like a tweet, which is just like a blue bird that they send with a message, and they talk about like a GPS on a horse, which is like a giddy up navigation, whatever they call it. So they have a lot of fun and kind of blending that together, and a lot of the jokes kind of come in like the Shrek films did, of how they kind of do that. I do think at times, because of that, like particularly there's a scene that kind of takes place in like a club, and it just sort of looks like a modern club. There's like dance music and lights flashing, and at least to me, it broke the immersion a little bit too far of not really fitting in sort of the aesthetic that they were going for. But granted, I think immersion for this movie is definitely not one of the primary goals. Kind of another way that this film separates itself maybe from like the Panda movies is the meta jokes, and this film kind of breaks the fourth wall all the time. The characters in the movie are very aware that they're in a movie, and kind of comment on the tropes in sort of like a self-depreciating way of, hey, this is the montage, the training montage, isn't it? Or, hey, this is sort of the moment when the hero usually kind of, stumbles upon his great opportunity, or, at one point, one of the character even sort of says, hey, we got to do this quick or whatever, because this movie only has 85 minutes, not counting the end credits. And so it's definitely kind of in on the fact that it is sort of following some of these sort of tropes and kind of standard narrative stuff, which I think in some ways, these jokes will go over the heads of like a young audience. You just don't get sort of the meta jokes, but there is enough like also like slapsticky stuff and just sort of fun kind of cartoon action that I do think will engage maybe the younger viewers as well. But another element that I think maybe will be for this movie divisive for parents is that it does have a pretty kind of sharp, slightly kind of darker tone, maybe comparable to like the Angry Birds movie. Not that was like a dark movie, but just sort of that like more sarcastic, kind of sharp humor in some of the comments. And I think that is most evident with the villain in this movie, which is a cat voiced by Ricky Gervais, who is basically just Gervais as a cat. His humor, sort of his real kind of sharp, kind of sarcastic humor is sort of comes through in this character. And at least to me, I just found him not entertaining, but more just like, this guy's a big jerk. He's just sort of mean to people, and that's sort of funny because he's mean, but the humor itself isn't necessarily, he's not saying anything clever. So I don't think it's necessarily always like offensive. He's not saying things that are alarming, but it does have sort of this more sort of sharp, kind of more, maybe more like mature, darker kind of tone throughout. And she mentioned too, as far as the animation in this thing, this is an animated movie. It's not bad, but there's not a whole lot particularly interesting or unique about the main movie. It looks like a lot of other animated movies. Kind of the exception to that is there is sort of some like flashback scenes and stuff where they do explore like some 2D animation or more stylized 3D animation. And these scenes are awesome. The stuff they do with that is super creative, super just visually stunning. Kind of made me wish that they would have incorporated some of that kind of creative inspiration sort of throughout the film. But definitely there's some standout scenes like for those flashback scenes. As far as content to consider in this film, profanity, there's no, I don't think, like, actual profanity. There's a lot of placeholder swears, which, like, dang it, or what the flush, or Samuel L. Jackson's voiced character, where he says, what the mother, father, cocker spaniel, which obviously you can read between the lines, especially if you know who's voicing the characters. So there's definitely a lot of that in this movie. And there's plenty of sort of what I call rude words, like stupid or idiot or dumb, or some of those words that the characters are saying. So again, if you're a parent, be aware of that. Violence, not really violent. There's cartoon violence. They're fighting and stuff. Although on several occasions, like the characters are talking about like killing people, and one cat kind of messes up, and the bad guy like singles and like archers shoot and like execute him, I guess. Like, it's not shown on camera. You kind of hear him like, and fall down, shot with sharp arrows. You don't see like a dead cat body or anything. So maybe just sort of more implied, and some of the tone is maybe a bit more violent than some children's movies. Sexuality, there's nothing. The only thing that I would say for sexuality, it's kind of near the start of the film. There's like some bandits riding by on horses, and the gusts of wind are kind of blowing things out of the way. And they go through a house and sort of blow a shower curtain open, where like a female cat is having a shower, and she has bottoms on but nothing else, and she kind of screams and like covers her chest area, which again I think was unnecessary. She's a cat, so it's not like you see anything like super gratuitous in it, but it is sort of maybe an unnecessary sexual moment in this movie. As far as theme stuff going on beneath the surface of this movie, it does have some good themes. They're very much kind of on the nose themes, but things that I think Christians can maybe talk through with their kids, and some good lessons. Kind of the main one is just sort of overcoming prejudice. Hank is he's the only dog in this movie. He's like a dog in the realm of cats, and he very much is treated sort of like this immigrant. He's sort of this outsider. He's in prison for kind of entering the cat country illegally, and some of the cat kind of characters yell things like, go back where you came from, cat chaser, or you should never have come here, you don't belong. Which again is very much sort of on the nose kind of commentary to kind of like immigration stuff. Although I think it can be applied in a wider sense of just sort of the other, or sort of the outsider, and kind of how we view people that don't look just like us. And the film kind of treats prejudice kind of by exposing just like some of the ridiculous nature of it. There's some funny sort of kind of almost overstated jokes, for like where one cat makes the comment, my dad hated dogs, and that's good enough for me. It's not really based on logic. It just feels right to hate, And another cat's like, hey, makes sense to me. So moments like that where they're just sort of poking fun at sort of prejudice and kind of how silly that is. And again, at the end of through that journey of the cats learning to accept the dog for being a dog, and the dog, loving the cats. And so they kind of work through some of those prejudice, where kind of the summary of the whole kind of message is stated by Hank at the end. Where he says, we have to find a way beyond judging each other, strictly beyond labels like dog and cat, and we can all be better together. And that is the takeaway for this. Again, if you want to, you can make that political and all that kind of stuff. But I think just at a base level, and especially for like a younger audience, hey, just learning to see people, or as dogs and cats in this case, and just sort of accepting them for who they are is a wholesome message. Maybe one other quick thing that I think this thing does that might be of note for young viewers is sort of kind of embracing who you are, and not in like a kind of an alarming like postmodern sort of like define who you are sense, but more in like a, hey, God's made us all unique. We all have strengths and kind of weaknesses and stuff, and we kind of need to embrace who we are, rather than just sort of trying to fit into some other kind of expectations. And again, that's sort of most clearly seen with Hank. He's in a world of cats. All the samurai are cats. He wants to be a samurai, and kind of he's initially trained sort of to be a samurai like a cat, trying to do things that he just can't do because he's a dog. He's not built the same way. He can't climb like a cat does. But hey, he has better smell. He can dig like cats can't. And so I think there is some stuff there too with the message of just sort of, kind of how God made us. That's a very biblical theme as far as being called different ways, and we all serve a function. So I think there is some stuff for parents to kind of talk through with their kids in that. So in the end, I didn't dislike Paws of Furious. I think there actually a lot of stuff I enjoyed about this. It's entertaining. It's not like a boring movie. There is some good stuff in it. I do think that kind of on the other side, like some of the maybe the sharper, kind of a little bit more cynical tone to this thing, kind of stripped some of the kind of like the childlike escapism and made it a little more mature. And even just Hank, I never did kind of feel attached to the character of Hank. He kind of lacks like the overflowing enthusiasm and positivity of like Poe did in the Panda movies, and he's kind of just like he's a bit of an arrogant kind of jerky character. Obviously, he overcomes some of that and becomes a hero, and that's the point of the movie. But just never really latched onto it. So I don't think that this movie doesn't really come close to like reaching the level of like the Kung Fu Panda movies. But I do think it has enough to offer sort of that's good and some wholesome messages that it does avoid just being kind of reduced to like, or, ignored as like just like a cheap knockoff. So there's definitely good to be had. But hey, let me know what you guys think. If you guys go see this movie, if you see it with your kid, love to have a conversation. If you enjoyed this movie, if you kind of, what you thought of some of the themes, if you're like me and found some of the tone, like some of like the sharp humor and kind of darker stuff, if that kind of maybe put you off a bit like it did me, I'd love to have a conversation with you on that. But hey, if you guys haven't done so, I encourage you, subscribe to our channel, like this video, just join with what we're doing here at The Collision. Got a lot of stuff coming. Would love to have you be a part of that. But thanks for watching, guys. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.